Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a concept that has just absolutely saturated our culture, our media, and really our collective consciousness. We're going to rigorously and exhaustively dissect the lexical and theological reality of Armageddon. Look, if you ask the average person on the street what Armageddon is, their mind immediately jumps to, Michael Bay movies, rogue asteroids, or just some generalized, fiery, apocalyptic doomsday scenario. For decades, the popular understanding of this term has been heavily driven by Hollywood blockbusters and these highly simplified eschatological models that treat the ancient text like it's a futuristic geopolitical thriller. But today, we're going to replace that popular mythology with strict, verified academic evidence. We are stripping away the cinematic explosions. Instead, we're going to look directly at historical grammar, ancient translation mechanics, and biblical theology to uncover what this ultimate conflict actually represents in the original texts. It's a fascinating journey, so let's get into it. So I want you to literally pause for a second and genuinely reconsider your core assumptions here. If you've grown up in the last 20 years, you've likely absorbed the idea, whether through pop culture, movies, or even just casual teaching, that Armageddon is a literal earthly battlefield, specifically that it's situated in some dusty valley in the Middle East, where modern human armies with tanks and jets will one day gather. But what if the very name of this battle has been completely misunderstood due to an ancient linguistic glitch? What if the most famous battlefield in human history is, at its core, fundamentally a typo? And what if the geographical location you've been taught to look at is just completely 100% incorrect? We are about to embark on a massive scholarly paradigm shift. By looking at the hard data, we are going to completely rewrite the map of this ultimate cosmic conflict. Okay, here's our structural roadmap for today. 1. The myth of Megiddo. 2. A geographical category error. 3. The linguistic transliteration key. 4. Uncovering Har mode. 5. The cosmic divine council. And finally, 6. Zion, the true battleground. Section 1, the myth of Megiddo, the historical archetype of war. To understand the truth, we obviously have to start by deeply examining the error. The traditional view erroneously places this cosmic conflict in the localized Jezreel Valley, specifically at a site known as Megiddo. For generations, scholars and lay people alike have pointed to this relatively small farming valley in northern Israel as the definitive staging ground for the end of the world. According to scholar R.H. Mounts in his 1997 work on the Book of Revelation, the traditional academic perspective is summarized perfectly. He writes, "The name is a symbol for the final conflict between God and the forces of evil. Megiddo was the battlefield of Palestine." Now, what Mounts is highlighting here is a classic psychological phenomenon. It's known as the availability heuristic. Human beings, and yes, that includes ancient writers and modern readers, naturally look for mental shortcuts. In the ancient world, the Jezreel Valley, which was overseen by the fortress city of Megiddo, was the ultimate strategic military choke point of the ancient Near East. It hosted countless historical battles between massive empires. Because of this intense history, interpreters just naturally default to this highly recognizable, available historical battlefield. They assume the author of Revelation simply utilized this well-known location as an established archetype to symbolize terminal warfare. But here's the catch. By relying on this mental shortcut, they accidentally sacrifice actual topographical reality for historical availability. And the traditional view doesn't just rely on historical assumptions. It relies on a very specific, highly literal reading of the text. According to D.E. On's 1998 commentary, we see this illustrated perfectly. He states, Armageddon is a Greek transliteration of the Hebrew phrase Har Megiddo, Mount of Megiddo. To really grasp why this is problematic, we need to understand what a transliteration actually is. Transliteration is not translation. When you translate, you carry the actual meaning of a word into a new language, like turning the Spanish word hola into the English hello. But when you transliterate, you are merely mapping the phonetic sounds from one alphabet into another, character by character. Defenders of the traditional view map the Greek word Harmageddon directly to the Hebrew sounds of Har Megiddo. They see the root consonants MGD, and they immediately, almost reflexively, assume it points to Megiddo. But this direct phonetic mapping sets up a massive structural friction in the text that we are about to dismantle. Which brings us to Section 2, a geographical category error, the mountain that doesn't exist. This is the first major logical flaw of the traditional view, and honestly, it is a massive one. In academic textual criticism, Physical topography deeply matters. And when we methodically analyze the explicit topography of the Holy Land alongside this traditional Megiddo theory, we literally crash into an insurmountable wall. We encounter a mountain that simply does not exist. We need to look closely at these two ancient Hebrew words, because conflating them creates a profound category error. The Hebrew word har, specifically and strictly, designates a natural, towering geological mountain. But here is the unavoidable topical reality. Megiddo is not a mountain. Megiddo is what archaeologists classify as a tell. A tell is an artificial layered dirt mound. It's created when a civilization builds a city in a flat valley, that city is eventually destroyed, and the next generation just comes along and builds a new city directly on top of the rubble. Over thousands of years, this creates an artificial hill. Therefore, saying Mount Megiddo or Har Megiddo is a geographic impossibility. It is a sheer oxymoron. It's the exact academic equivalent of saying Mount Death Valley. You are taking a word that explicitly means a soaring geological formation and attaching it to a man-made dirt mound sitting in a flat farming plain. There simply is no geographic Mount Megiddo anywhere in the Holy Land.
Now, traditional scholars fully recognize this massive geographical anomaly, and honestly, their attempts to fix it actually reveal the underlying weakness of the entire theory. According to J. Day's 1980 publication, we see a desperate attempt to bridge this gap. He writes, since Megiddo was situated at the foot of the Mount Carmel range, it is possible that Mount of Megiddo was an alternative name for Mount Carmel. This is a textbook example of the fallacy of equivocation. To understand how absurd this is, consider the concept of a synecdoche. That's a figure of speech where a part is made to represent the whole, like calling a car your wheels. In a desperate attempt to salvage the Megiddo theory, scholars are forced to invent a geographical synecdoche entirely out of thin air. They're trying to claim that a localized dirt mound in a flat valley is actually just a poetic nickname for the massive adjacent Mount Carmel mountain range. They're interpolating geographical data that simply does not exist in the manuscript, just to cover up a glaring structural flaw.
So how do we fix this? Section 3. The linguistic transliteration key. Septuagint translation mechanisms.
To solve this mystery, we have to abandon the geographical map altogether and look instead at a linguistic one. We're going to step into the realm of ancient philology and deeply analyze the mechanics of how ancient Greek scholars actually translated Northwest Semitic texts into their own language. And this is where the true academic breakthrough happens. According to C.C. Torrey, in his rigorous 1938 scholarship on the subject, a verifiable linguistic rule was identified. Torrey noted, the Greek gamma often represents the Semitic gain, hard ayin. The original Hebrew is har moed. Torrey identified a highly specific, mechanical rule regarding a guttural sound in ancient Hebrew. You see, Northwest Semitic languages utilized sounds generated deep in the throat, sounds that literally did not exist in the Greek phonetic toolkit. This realization signals a major game-changing turning point in our lexical reconstruction, because it turns out the G in Armageddon isn't actually a G at all.
And this brilliantly illustrates the point. To really make sense of this, I want you to think of this ancient Septuagint localization process sort of like modern software porting. Imagine you are trying to open a document written on a Mac using an old PC. If the Mac document uses a highly specific font character that the PC operating system just doesn't have, what happens? The PC will automatically substitute the closest available character to fill the void. Ancient Hebrew possessed a hard phoneme for the letter ayin, sounding like a deep, guttural gwine. The Greek alphabet had absolutely no equivalent for this sound in their operating system, none. So translators systematically substituted this hard Hebrew ayin with the Greek letter gamma, which is the G sound. Let's look at the first example here. The Hebrew word for Gomorrah starts with a guttural ayin, Amorah. The Greeks didn't have that later, so they substituted a gamma, resulting in Gomorrah. The exact same mechanical substitution happened with Gaza. And, absolutely crucially, this exact same linguistic porting happened with Armageddon.
Let's methodically, deliberately walk through the exact mechanism of this transliteration glitch. When the author of Revelation, who, remember, was thinking conceptually in ancient Hebrew, wrote the name of this location, it was transliterated into Greek. Later readers saw that Greek letter gamma, the G sound in Armageddon, and incorrectly assumed it mapped directly back to the Hebrew letter gimel. This false assumption led them to reconstruct the root as MGD, thereby pointing them directly to Megiddo. But if we apply the verifiable historical translation law of the Septuagint, we must realize that the Greek gamma is actually just a placeholder. It's a substitution for the Hebrew guttural ayin. Therefore, we have to shift the root consonants entirely. We aren't dealing with a slight spelling error here. We are definitively, absolutely dealing with the root M-A-D.
Section 4. Uncovering Har Mued.
the true translation. By correctly applying this historical transliteration law, the entire geographical anomaly vanishes in an instant. Seriously, this is the thrill of academic discovery, when an equation finally balances perfectly. A completely new, mathematically sound, and geographically accurate location is immediately revealed right there in the text. When we reconstruct the Hebrew phrase using the academically verified root consonants m.shkach.m, we get the phrase Har Moed. In Hebrew, Har Moed translates to the Mount of Assembly or the Mountain of the Appointed Feast. Now, the theological stakes of this specific root substitution simply cannot be overstated. Because think about it. We are no longer looking downward at an artificial dirt mound in a farming valley where human empires clashed. We are looking upward at a mountain of divine assembly. This completely elevates the scale of the text. It shifts it from a localized, human skirmish involving modern geopolitical nations to an event of immense cosmic and divine importance. According to Meredith G. Klein in his 1996 scholarly journal entry in the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society, this argument is cemented plainly. He states, "There is no Mount Megiddo. The equation of Armageddon with Har Moed resolves the geographic impossibility." This isn't just some fringe linguistic theory, it is the necessary elegant fix for the text's apparent contradiction. Klein emphasizes that this philological correction just effortlessly resolves the topographical anomaly. It entirely removes the need for the synecdoche, all those logical fallacies, and the intense mental gymnastics that plagued the traditional view for so many decades.
Section 5. The Cosmic Divine Council, the Ancient Near Eastern Context.
So, if the linguistic data points point us to the Mount of Assembly, what exactly does that phrase imply? We have to expand the scope of our explainer beyond just grammar and introduce a historical grammatical shift in the narrative. We really need to ask, what did the phrase Mount of Assembly mean to a first-century mind steeped in the ancient Near Eastern worldview? Well, to an ancient Near Eastern reader, Har Moed is not merely a place where people gather. It is the cosmic mountain where the divine council meets. In their worldview, God possessed a spiritual governing body, an actual divine administration of spiritual entities. The Mount of Assembly is the literal seat of ultimate universal authority. We actually see this exact phrasing utilized in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 13. In that deeply prophetic text, the rebellious divine entity, often referred to as the Shining One, declares his ultimate treasonous goal. His goal is to sit on the Mount of the Congregation, which is the exact Hebrew phrase, Har Moed. The objective of the spiritual powers of darkness has always been usurping Yahweh's headquarters, which is traditionally associated with the cosmic north. Therefore, what the book of Revelation is describing is not a simple earthly war involving human tanks, jets, and geopolitical borders. It's detailing a massive, supernatural siege where rebel spiritual entities are staging a final ultimate assault to conquer God's own administration.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how completely it reframes our expectations. According to Dr. Michael Heiser in his 2015 book, The Unseen Realm, he frames this narrative perfectly. He explains, the Battle of Armageddon is about the Mount of Assembly, Jerusalem, and the presence of Yahweh. By shifting the focus from Megiddo to the Mount of Assembly, the entire narrative clicks into place. The powers of darkness are not gathering in some random, historically significant farming valley in northern Israel. They are gathering to strike at the absolute geographic and theological heart of Yahweh's presence. The stakes here are profoundly higher than human warfare. Section 6. Zion, the true battleground, the final siege. This brings us to the ultimate conclusion of our academic investigation. If Armageddon is actually Har Moed, the Mount of Assembly, then where is the literal physical location of Yahweh's Har Moed according to biblical theology? Let's definitively contrast the erroneous tradition with the verified truth. The myth, built on a transliteration error and human assumptions, points us to Har Megiddo, an artificial dirt mound in the Jezreel Valley. The reality, validated by strict philology and ancient theology, points us to Har Moed. And if we examine the broader biblical text, specifically Psalm 48, verses 1 and 2, the text explicitly and conclusively identifies Mount Zion in Jerusalem as God's holy mountain, his beautiful elevation, the city of the great king. Mount Zion is the established seat of God's government. It is his literal Mount of Assembly. This eschatological conflict is a supernatural siege on Jerusalem itself, which perfectly mirrors the epic final battle prophecies found in texts like Zechariah chapters 12 and 14. Mount Zion is the true geographical target. According to Dr. Heiser, we get a definitive summary of this paradigm shift. He states with absolute clarity, Armageddon is not a battle fought where you've been taught. It is the battle for the Mount of Assembly, Har Moed, which is Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Dr. Heiser hits the nail on the head here. By prioritizing original language mechanics and rigorous historical grammar over popular, cinematic tradition, the data unequivocally isolates Mount Zion as the correct referent.
We have successfully traded a flawed Hollywood geographical myth for a profound, textually accurate theological reality.
So what does this all mean for us? This leaves us with a massive paradigm shift to carry forward. If Armageddon is not a geopolitical skirmish in a dusty valley, but rather a final supernatural cosmic siege on God's own throne in Jerusalem, how does this completely rewrite your understanding of the ultimate conflict between light and darkness? When we strip away the Hollywood myths and look strictly at the rigorous academic evidence, the ancient texts reveal a story that is far more epic, far more complex, and far more cosmically significant than we ever realized. Keep questioning your assumptions, respect the data, and always keep looking deeper. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.